Hello, Algebra 1, and this is a quick lesson on Section 1.1, solving simple equations, one-step equations. Okay, so I want to just go over some of the vocabulary here. We're going to skip conjecture, rule, and theorem, and talk more about the vocabulary written down below here. So we'll be talking a lot about linear equations in one variable. Okay, so remember that an equation is a math sentence setting two expressions equal. So the big thing about an equation is that it has an equal sign. Okay, that's something that's really, really big. Remember that an expression itself has no equal sign, but an equation will take two of those expressions and set them equal. So it could be like I have an expression like this, and then I have an expression like this, and I set them equal to make an equation. So this and this are the expression. Setting them equal makes it an equation. A linear equation in one variable is going to be something in the form of ax plus b equals 0. We will see in later chapters that will be set equal to something like y when we get into graphing. Okay, remember that for equations have an equal sign. The other thing about equations is that the directions often, I say often, not always, will say solve, meaning we find the value of the variable. Now, a solution to an equation is a value that makes the equation true. And sometimes, like looking at this equation up here, it'd be kind of hard to figure out, okay, what does x need to be so that both sides are the same number? So something like 10 equals 10 or 0 equals 0. So what we do is we solve for that variable to figure out what it is. And the way that we solve these is we use what's called inverse operation. Another word for inverse could be the word opposite. Okay, inverse operations are just two operations that undo each other. And we are familiar with some of these inverse operations, like adding and subtracting is one pair of inverse operations, and division and multiply is another. Okay. Often when we hear the word undo, you can think that it cancels it to like a 0 or a 1. Okay. Equivalent equations is just simply put equations with the same solution. So I'll just write that down quickly for you. Okay, so let's look at the properties that we have here. Okay, so for each of these properties, I'm going to give you a quick example. The directions for these examples are going to be solve. Okay, so the addition property of equality is the idea that if I have an equal statement, if I add the same thing to both sides, it's still equivalent. So the addition property of equality is the idea of adding the same number to each side of an equation. Remember, the sides of an equation are separated by an equal sign. So here's one side that's equal to another side. So the way that we solve this is we use the inverse operation of minusing 3, which is adding 3. If I do that on one side, I must do it on the other side. That will allow us to cancel this out. And the reason it cancels it out is because negative 3 plus 3 equals 0. So what that leaves you with, basically, I'm just thinking about this in my head, is it leaves me with x plus 0. We don't need to write x plus 0. We can just write x, bring down the equal sign, and simplify negative 5 plus 3, which is negative 2. So negative 2 is our solution. The step that I wrote in red of showing the inverse operation on each side can definitely be done in your head. The stuff written in blue, those are your steps. That's something that I would like to see. Subtraction property of equality. Well, that is the idea of subtracting the same number from each side of an equation. So very similar to what we just did. An example of that would be if we were to solve n plus 3 equals negative 7. So again, I'm going to think about this in my head. I can think that, well, the inverse operation of adding 3 is minusing 3. So maybe you write the minus 3 on both sides. You can do that in your head if you want to. Either way, you end up with n plus 0, because that cancels to 0, which is just n. Bring down the equal sign, negative 7 and negative 3 equals negative 10, which that is your answer. Okay. The next thing that we have here is the multiplication property of equality. The multiplication property of equality is the idea of multiplying each side of an equation by the same number. Okay. So an example of this could be if we had n divided by 5 equals 3. So since we have n divided by 5, remember fraction is division, the way that we undo that is we multiply by the number that we're trying to eliminate. So I'm going to multiply by 5, which basically means that this is 5 over 1. But don't forget, you must multiply it to the other side as well. 5 over 5, remember, that's an equivalent form of 1. So it cancels out because 1 times n is the same as n. So what I'm left with here is I'm left with n, and on the other side, I'm left with 15. Okay? The next is the division property of equality. The division property of equality is the idea of dividing each side of an equation by the same number. So an example of that could be something like negative 3x equals 9. Remember that negative 3x includes what we call a coefficient. A coefficient is a number that is multiplied to a variable. The number on the other side, 9, that is not considered a coefficient. That would be considered a constant value. Okay, so we have coefficient, which is a number in front of a variable, and we have a constant, and a constant is a number without a variable. So a constant would be something like 3. So if I go back to this top example, a constant would be something like 3. So to finish this problem off, I would divide both sides by negative 3. The reason I divide by negative 3 is because what's being multiplied to x is a negative 3. That is not a minus 3. That is a negative 3 times x. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3, which will give me an equivalent form of 1 right there, leaving me with 1x, which is just x. Simplifying the other side, I get negative 3. Your answers can be whole numbers. They could also be fractions. Fractions are okay. If you do have a fraction answer, please just reduce the fraction. No decimals or mixed numbers needed. So for the word problem, it says a coupon subtracts $17.95 from the price P of a pair of headphones. You pay $71.80 for the headphones after using the coupon. Write and solve an equation to find the original price of the headphones. Okay, so the price of the headphones is P. That's how much it costs if you go into the store. Okay, you took away or subtracted a certain amount because you had a coupon, which led to the final price being $71.80. So here we have an equation that we can solve for P to find the original price of the headphones before the coupon. So the way that you would do that is you would add $17.95 to both sides. Remember, when you're adding decimals, to line your decimals up. This will cancel to a 0, leaving you with P. And then we have adding this together. We have 5, we have 7, the decimal, we carried a 1, we got 9 and 8. Okay, so the total amount, or not the total amount, but the original cost, if I could get that straight, of the headphones was $89.75. Okay, and then looking at number 11, it says you have 2/5 of the brownies you made left over. There are 16 brownies left. How many brownies did you make for the party? So in this one, they didn't give you a variable. So we're going to say X is going to represent the number of brownies made. Okay. The word of, when you see the word of, I want you to think multiply. So if I have 2/5 of the brownies you made, if the brownies you made is X and of is multiply, that's going to be 2/5 of X, or 2/5 times X. 2/5 of the brownies you made is going to be the brownie that's left, which is 16. So here we have a fraction multiplied to X. I know that when things are multiplied, we say to divide. So if you have 2/5 and you divide 2/5, essentially what is happening there, remember, to divide two fractions, you just multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator. So when I'm trying to cancel out a fraction, what I do is I just multiply by the reciprocal. Anytime you take a fraction and a reciprocal and you multiply them, you get a 1. So by canceling these out, you're left with X. But don't forget, you've got to multiply it on the other side. See, I almost forgot. And when you're multiplying, you can do this off to the side. Remember, 16 is just 16 over 1 times 5 over 2. You can multiply and then divide by 2, or you can divide the 2 and the 16 and then multiply by 5. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out a 2, or reduce by 2, leaving me with 8. And I can see here that I get 40. So the answer is 40 brownies. So I hope that this was a good reminder of solving one-step or simple equations. And if you have questions, please come to support, and best of luck with your practice.